2015, New York State changed their underground storage tank regulations. They previously had it's 6 NYCRR, New York Code Rules and Regulations, parts 6, 12, 13, and 14. They got rid of them all, combined them into a new 6 NYCRR part 613, which covers underground storage tanks. And in New York State, the DEC is in charge of all the tanks in all the regions, but they do delegate that responsibility down to the county level. And in our area, Westchester County Department of Health, on Huguenot Street in New Rochelle, that's where the health department, the tanks folks are. I was down there a couple of days ago meeting with them on a couple of projects that I have going on. Delegated counties have to they have their own regulations. Their regulations have to meet the regulations of the DEC. And right now, I believe this week or next, Westchester County will have new effective regulations that match the new regulations that New York State promulgated in 2015. So that should be coming up here pretty quickly. The new underground tank regulations, okay, and as well as above ground tanks. If you have ASTs, whether it's down in a basement or something, I know a lot of you folks are real estate and building owners on a commercial level, so most of what you're dealing with is probably fuel oil. That would be covered under subpart 3, okay, underground storage tanks, subject only to Title 10 of the Environmental 17 Environmental Conservation Law. That's New York State law, which oversees the underground heating oil tanks. And then if you have above ground storage tank systems, USTs, motor fuels, things like that. How many people in here have fuel oil tanks? A couple people, I'm sure all you guys do. So let's talk about some of the problems that you may have with underground tanks. I want to open it up to get some participation. Yes, sir. Hey, where'd you get that beer?
Hey, can you go get a couple more? You know it. I had 1,000 gallons in storage. It was there when I bought my home.
Yep.
I had it taken out of the ground, put in above ground storage tank in my basement.
Sure.
And when they took it out, they found like pitting, and the company that took it out with the spill report with the county, whatever.
Yep.
And
the Westchester?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I had my insurance company come in, and they did all this testing, which was far more extensive than the company that pulled it out. They refuted the company that pulled the tank out, and the insurance company said there's no pollution or contamination here that's significant. They closed the spill report. It was just so frustrating.
But it cost you a lot of money.
Well, that was fortunately the insurance company that had to take care of it.
Right.
Because they were concerned about the liability that they would get.
Sure.
But it was just, it made me feel like, some companies pull these things out.
Yeah.
Spill reports just so they can get it.
Well, yeah, there are what we like to call bad actors in the industry, and I like to think that we're not bad actors.
It wasn't your company.
Well, better not be. Yeah. No, I understand. I've heard horror stories. We've been called in to help folks that have had problems with other companies. And again, I'm not going to throw stones at the competition. There are good companies, and there are, I guess less than ethical companies that want to create work. And typically, we don't operate this. Anybody else have any horror stories? I'll share a few with people. Anybody? I recently had up in Woodstock, New York, up in the beautiful Catskills. Again, it was a homeowner, and I'll put some fear into some of the fuel oil delivery folks here. An above-ground storage tank in a basement was overfilled, and the fuel keeps shooting out the vent. Okay, every tank has a fill and a vent because obviously when you're filling the tank, the air needs to get out to let the fuel go into the tank, and the vent was situated right above their drinking water well. So it came shooting out. Obviously, poor design to begin with, but the well filled up with oil. And one Saturday morning, I got a frantic call from the homeowners saying that there was fuel oil coming out of her shower head. So we immediately had to go and obviously we took care of the issue, closed out the spill with the DEC, cleaned up the environment and all that stuff. So that's one of many, but there are all kinds of horror stories. I'm dealing with a spill right now in Saugerties, New York, where this is a retail gasoline facility, but say they were not paying attention to their tanks. The bedrock was very shallow there, So they had a line leak, they didn't do anything about it, and at the gas station, typically you have what's called a pressurized system. So you have a submersible pump. The lines are always pressurized, so if they leak and you're not paying attention to it, it's just going to spray that gasoline out all the time. It did, it got into the bedrock and contaminated three drinking water wells, 2 of which are associated with the Comfort Inn, the hotel. So you had people coming in, checking in, going to their room, and they had gasoline in their water, and in their shower, and everything else. And those are just a couple of examples of what can happen if you don't pay attention to your fuel tanks. Fuel has to stay in the tanks.
I can share a story.
Yeah, go ahead.
The story is interesting because it covers a bunch of items. Managed property, large property. Sitting in the office, get a call. DC's detected a leak. There was people working about a mile away, doing some work in the river. And somehow traced there was oil in the water, and they traced the leak up to this property. So we immediately called the company to come in, look at it. The building was built in the 50s. We knew these were original tanks. We constantly took readings. There's no reason to believe there was any leak. Never was registered them, do all the tests, everything was supposed to do. We dig out the tank, and the tank happened to be in bedrock. And there was more oil than you could possibly imagine. It seeped into the bedrock, seeped into the ground. And took the tank out, and it was all pinhole. What was determined, this was even before I was managing the property, that this tank, was a 10,000, 5 or 10,000 tank, was probably leaking for 20 to 30 years. A slow drip. I don't want to get into all the costs involved and what was involved. But the moral to the story is that you can't always, you're not even trust the readers. Say, now all the tanks are new and they're interstitial.
Yeah, and I'll explain that. Sure, that's a great point. Any tank with the new regulations, actually the previous set of regulations. Backing up here a little bit, DEC really didn't exist until the mid-1980s. And the original set of underground storage tank regulations that came out that were effective December 27th of 1986. You have to, if you install a tank underground in New York, it has to be double walled. It has to be. It can't be a single wall tank. You can have a single wall tank, but you have to have a liner or some type of secondary containment underneath it. So any tank you put in the ground now has to be double walled. And let's talk about regulated tanks versus unregulated tanks. If your tank is less than 1,100 gallons, typically it's not regulated unless it's something weird like waste oil. So that's usually the cutoff for having to have a registered facility. I've had homeowners come to me, I have a 2,000-gallon fuel oil tank, and I asked them, I said, is it registered? And they have no idea. So you have to understand, what the regulations are. You have to understand the construction of the tank, and depending on the age of the tank, there's 3 different types of tanks. There's Category 1, Category 2, Category 3 tanks. Category 1 tanks are pre-1986, before the regulations existed. Category 2 tanks are tanks that were installed between 1986 and October 11th, 2015. And now any tanks that go in the ground now are considered Category 3 tanks. And there's a different regulatory framework for each of those categories of tanks. So it really depends on when the tank was installed. So it's important to know your tank installation date. A couple of other things, paperwork and records. It's critical that if you have if you're a building, or these gentlemen here, you're operating large fuel oil tanks, 10,000 gallon, 20,000 gallon fuel oil tanks for either for generators or for boilers to heat buildings, you need to pay attention to your tanks, because a leak can cost you. I would rather have somebody spend money on me coming in and training them on what they need to do than I would to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars cleaning up a spill. I'm doing a project right now. It's a large retirement community in Westchester County along the Hudson River. same thing happened. They overfilled the tank. The driver wasn't paying attention. They actually had the guy on closed circuit television. He wasn't paying attention, and it was a pressurized delivery. The fuel came out of the vent, got into a storm drain, got right out into the Hudson River. So not only did they have the DEC and the Westchester County Department of Health on them, they also had the Westchester County District Attorney on them as well. So we had to do a lot of modifications to their tanks. I'll talk about some of the things you have to have, you know, as far as overfill prevention, spill prevention, leak detection, things like that. There's equipment out there that can do that for you, but you have to pay attention to it, and you have to know what that stuff is.
Hey, Michael,
yes.
Quick question regarding Jeff's example. Why wouldn't a air tank tightness test catch that? Was it before, would we assume that it's before the regulation?
No, it should. I mean, if you have, you know, you can have a company come on. My company does it. There's a million companies out there that will do it, that can actually come in and do a tightness test on an underground storage tank. It could be a small 250, 500,000 gallon underground tank. We test tanks up to, I believe it's up to, we can test up to 30,000 gallons. And then when you get much larger than that, there's other protocols you need to do. So, but yes, absolutely. If you regularly test your tank, if you have an old fuel oil tank at your house that you don't know where the hell it is or you know what shape it's in, I would recommend getting it tested. That'll give you at least a little bit of peace of mind. But the old single wall steel tanks, they rust out. We do, you know, we do probably a dozen of them a month that we do on the residential side. You pull these tanks out and you look inside. It's like looking at, you know, Vincent Van Gogh's Starry, Starry Night. You just see these pinholes of light in there with the lights getting, you know, coming through it. And the tanks leak, and it costs thousands and thousands of dollars. And then if you impact your, you know, a lot of times in the Catskills or some of the other rural areas, actually, you know, places like Putnam County and northern Westchester, people rely on groundwater for drinking, right? So that's why DEP and DEC are all over people. They have to protect that valuable resource. So, question? Yes?
So I'm just curious, what material are they made out of? Should they be made out of so that this? Like,
well, you can. It's an excellent question. I'll give you a couple of examples here. Go back here. Here's just a couple of tanks. This is a steel tank. It's called a STIP 3. Steel Tank Institute, three levels of protection. It's a double-walled steel tank. But if you notice on the tank, they have these. They're called sacrificial anodes. The tank is cathodically protected. So what happens is you put an electrically active metal like magnesium or something like that, and you attach it to the tank, and because it's more electrically active, that will tend to rust and rot away over many, many years. Typically they'll warranty a tank like that for 30 years. So over that time, these little hunks of magnesium, or these sacrificial, they get sacrificed, these anodes, they rot away, and they protect the shell of the tank, and you know, so it doesn't rust. Okay. Plus, you have a double wall, and inside, I'll show you an example of what we do. It's called interstitial leak detection on double-walled underground tanks. But again, fiberglass tanks are generally state-of-the-art now. That's what people typically do. So.
they're state-of-the-art fiberglass?
Absolutely.
Stainless steel? I mean, no.
Underground for fuel and petroleum products, the big manufacturers are, these are Xerxes. You can tell by the, let me see, I go back here to, these are containment solutions. Those are fiberglass tanks as well. And some of these you can actually get triple wall tanks now. So you can see the manufacturer, just by looking at the color of the tank, you can typically tell where they came from. Actually, they make green fiberglass tanks that Containment Solutions makes. The green ones are Canadian, they're made in Canada. These happen to be made in the US. The Xerxes are, they're a red fiberglass. But yes, fiberglass is state-of-the-art now. Fiberglass tanks, fiberglass piping, flexible piping. You know, we install a lot of that. It's easier to install. The fittings are easier to deal with, and you don't have to be precise on your angles. It makes it easier for the guys when they install. But that's a great question.
That's what, Michael, you know, one of the things I think we run into quite a bit is there are a lot of tanks in Westchester County, in buildings were built probably in the late 50s, early 60s, underground, that are burning 6-oil. And with the decline in 6-oil was very unregulated underground storage tanks. You really didn't have to pressure test them. And now you're seeing where, you know, people are converting and are going to be forced to convert this to oil very shortly. And the problems that people are going to have is those tanks probably shouldn't be holding over 2 fuel oil.
Right, yeah. And the difference between 6 and 2, people want to know what that is. 6 oil is much more viscous, it's thicker, it's not, so if,
It's almost sludge.
right, so if it leaks, all right, and asphalt and emulsion products and things like that, they're not as heavily regulated because if the stuff leaks out of the tank, it's not going to go very far. Okay, but that's a great point, absolutely.
And the other factor is you really have to, you know, anyone here from Westchester County Department of Health? Can we shut the camera off now? No.
You're safe.
We're safe. Having dealt with them on numerous occasions, they're very, very strong policing of
I was
oil
going to use
tanks.
the term militant.
Militant is another word. And they run a court, basically, where they'll come up and they'll find a violation almost anywhere, quite honestly. I mean, whether if you have a super and he's not keeping his logs properly, you have to follow all the regulations. If your fill port, the paint has faded over the winter, that's a problem. If the signage is not 100% correct, that's a problem. And then you go get they'll call you up, you go in for a nice little hearing, and they sit down and they're very nice to you, and oh yeah, we got this all corrected. You know, and then you get the court date, or your date up in Mount Kisco.
Exactly. That's exactly, you hit the nail on the head. I was in New Rochelle for the hearing for one of my clients, and guess what? Next week I have to go to Mount Kisco.
And then you go to Mount Kisco, and they're very nice to you up there, and they, you know, trying to plea bargain something from you. And they say basically, well, we can settle this today for $5,000, or a maximum fine to go to trial is $32,500, minimum fine. So I would, you know, and you sit there all day while cases are heard, 37, whatever, yeah. And you sit there all day while these cases are heard, and you know everybody is, you know, okay, we got 5,000 on here, 5,000 on here, 5,000 here, 10,000 here, 15,000 up, and it's like a money machine.
It is, and that's a great point, and you don't want to find yourself in that position. And you know, again, I know I'm a geologist, I'm not a salesman, but I can just tell you, I mean, you know, pay attention, and if you don't know what you're doing, call somebody. You can call us, you can call somebody else, but just pay attention to your tanks. And if you don't know what's going on with them, pick up the phone. It's going to save you so much time, so much anguish, so many trips to New Rochelle and Mount Kisco. It's a pain in the butt. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on since I was going to talk about. But one thing we've done in our company, because of all these new regulations, because of how difficult they are, and also because of who comes and does the inspections, which can be difficult themselves when they hire, we retained the company, we put a program in, so rather than have our managers do these inspections, we work with these companies that come in and do them for us. Also put some of the liability off on them versus the property. And if also there is a case that they can come actually, some of them get to know the people, you know, in any kind of business, it's not always what you know, it's who you know, so how you can navigate it. So and the other point I wanted to bring up, which you talked about, was 6 oils were eliminated, Westchester 4 oil is going to be eliminated next year. So now, and also with all the, because of that, as well as efficiencies and other positive contributions from gas, price as well. So oil becomes so expensive now it's comparable with gas. So people are converted, not necessarily to gas, but sometimes dual fuel. But the point is you don't need as large oil tank. So what you do is you pull these tanks out, and you can also, because they're smaller, you can put them above ground, because you can find places for them.
Exactly.
So that will all, gets back to this topic of, again, these tanks are going to be dug up.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of rules. In
Yeah.
terms of, you used to be able to abandon them.
Well, you can.
I'm not sure if you can still do that.
Yes, you can. You can choose to. You can do 2 things when you're closing an underground storage tank. You can either pull it out of the ground, and if you pull it out of the ground, you have to do what's called a tank closure or assessment associated with that, and that's 40 CFR 280, which is the federal underground storage tank regulations. the DEC, because they ultimately report to the EPA, they mandate that you, or the county health department, you have to do a tank closure report. So that happens when you pull the tank out of the ground. If you choose to abandon the tank in place, typically you get the approval of the regulatory agency beforehand, let them know that this is what we want to do. And then you'd have to, typically we'll cut open the top of the tank, we'll physically enter the tank, clean it out. Sometimes, depending on the size of the tank, where it's located, you still have to assess the area where that tank is to make sure that it didn't leak. And there's various ways you can do that. You can poke holes in the ground, do a soil and groundwater investigation, and we've actually, sometimes we'll get in the tank itself, cut a hole in the bottom, and take some soil directly from beneath the tank, and have that analyzed in a laboratory to document what the soil conditions are. And then that way, once that's done, you fill the tank with an inert material. Typically, it's a concrete slurry, and you're done with it. I always advise people, if you can get the tank out of the ground, get the tank out of the ground. Because if you leave the tank in the ground and it's abandoned, there's always that nagging question. You want to sell the property, oh, there's a tank there, how come you didn't pull it? Why is it filled with concrete? People don't get it. It's a pain in the neck. So, have a question, sir?
Yes, I built my house back in '96,
Okay.
and I have my oil tank is in ground. When they installed it, they told me it was a double wall tank.
Yep.
Now, we were talking about being proactive about gauging your tank.
Yep.
One thing that I use is how much oil I purchase each year.
Yep.
And for the past, I have to say, about 15 years, we use between 1,150 and 1,200 gallons a year. Is that a good gauge to know?
Yeah,
that your
usually, again, I'll defer to some oil company people. I know that, based on heating degree days and things like that, how much heat you're going to use and everything else, that's not really my gig. But yes, I mean, I think if you are suddenly using more fuel, I think the oil companies may flag it. I don't know, you guys want to comment on that?
Yeah, but I also want to caution, because I've been in the oil business now for over 25 years. And so I've seen everything that you've said so far today, and that is 99% of the time that's a good gauge. But that 1% of the time it might not be. That pinhole you saw, if that exists, if you're losing a gallon a year, a gallon a month, you would never notice it until you pulled out the tank and say, "What's all that gray stuff there?"
Yeah, exactly.
So. Really, the best, if you have a double wall tank, you have a second pipe coming up out of the ground that you're probably getting to.
I got to slide out.
Yeah, so when he talks about interstitial space.
I have two pipes. I have one where the oil
Right,
goes
one is
in,
the
and
interstitial.
one is like a vent.
Well, you have a third one, actually. You have one that should be going into the space between the two walls of the tank.
How big is your tank?
550?
And is it fiberglass or I'm assuming steel? You don't
That
know?
I'm not sure.
Well, again, it doesn't cost a hell of a lot of money to do a tightness test on a residential small tank like that. It's probably $300-400. It's not a lot of money.
Okay.
And if you want that peace of mind, that's that's something that again, we do it. A lot of companies do it. Just go out there, shop around, and get a reputable testing company, and they'll do it for you. But if you put a tank in '96, again, a 550 is not regulated, so it doesn't have to meet the regulations. It's exempt.
Just one last thought, because I bought a house built in '57 with a 550 tank in it, and tested fine. I had it pulled out. It was fine. Probably had another 30 years in it, but just, as he said, for the peace of mind,
Yeah.
I wanted it above ground.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a little story. When I bought my house, two things: city water and natural gas. Because I just told you some horror stories. I want clean water, and I don't want to worry about fuel water. Even in an above-ground tank.
We built a mother-daughter house, so my father-in-law pushed the issue of putting it in the ground, and I wanted above ground. And of course, my wife told me don't make troubles. And now when I'm looking at it, she said, well, why'd you listen to us? You just can't win, so
I hear you. You do what you got to do, man. We're all in that boat, let me tell you.
Hey, Mike, I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Dave brought up the point before how 6 oil is basically sludge. How important is it for the tanks to be cleaned out before you go to another fuel? And does that impact the life of the actual tank?
I don't think it's going to impact the life of the tank, because typically when tanks are manufactured, the manufacturer will provide a warranty with that, and they're generally, now with regulations, they're compatible with all sorts of different stuff. Just as an example, you've seen the ethanol and E85 and things like that. Ethanol is ethyl alcohol. It's what's in beer, wine, and everything else. It's highly corrosive, and it can damage certain things, certain elastomers and glues and fibers. Actually, the older style fiberglass tanks, that ethanol can actually chew through the material and cause a release. But so the new tanks that come out, I mean, they would generally be compatible with all those fractions, all those different distillates. But as far as clean, that's a great point that Giovanni brought up. I think it's critical that you depending on certainly the larger commercial tanks, that they do get cleaned on a regular basis. You and I talked about it earlier. I mean, it's a lot of times over several years, you can get sediment, you can get all kinds of schmutz built up in the bottom of the tank, and it can create problems with your, typically a fuel oil tank, there's suction systems. It can create fouling, it can create all kinds of things. So it is smart. And as an example, there's a data processing center somewhere in Rockland County that is like the backup for 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 the generators for the New York Stock Exchange. So, and they have tanks, and they actually hired us to go in and we clean them out and everything else. And again, this is, several backups, to make sure that this thing's the stock exchange functions. So, but yes, cleaning is critical, and you don't have to do it every year. Every several years, you should probably have it take a look at it. We have equipment that can do that type of testing.
We even had buildings in Manhattan that converted from 6 oil to 2 oil, and even though the tanks were cleaned out, it's definitely, I would say, mandatory to clean the tank out before going to a lighter grade oil. To have the tanks pressure tested even after they're cleaned out, and to find pinholes.
Yeah, exactly.
You wouldn't see with the naked eye, but they're there when you put it under pressure.
That's a great point.
Because the 6 oil is so thick, it actually.
It really is.
So you're pressure testing it before you put the new fuel in?
Well, before you put the new fuel in, but after the tank's cleaned.
Just to make sure that nothing's going wrong. Let me blow through a couple of things here too, so we can get done here on time. Overflow prevention, automatic shut-off devices. Some of the larger tanks, you have an automatic tank aging system. So when the delivery is being made to the underground storage tank, or even an above-ground storage tank, you've got product level flow, so when that flow gets to a certain point, it'll trigger a high-level alarm. It'll be an audible or a visual alarm that basically says the tank is full. Mr. Delivery Guy, stop putting fuel in the tank. This would be an automatic tank gauge, automatic shut-off devices. I know Westchester County requires, particularly above-ground storage tank, to have some type of mechanical overfill prevention. So if you're putting fuel into a tank, there's going to be something that's going to restrict the flow, and it's actually going to prevent the fuel from getting in there, as opposed to filling the tank up and just having an alarm go off and not stop the flow. It's just telling you that it's there. One important thing, this is part of the new regulations. It actually came down from the Fed, so I get the circle and slash through here. Ball floats. Typically they're on a vent line, ball float. As the liquid level rises and the air is coming out of the tank to allow the fuel to go in, the ball will actually get jammed up in that cage, and it will restrict the flow of air out of the tank. And what that does is put pressure on the delivery hose, and it allows the driver to realize that the tank is filled. He's got to stop doing it, but they're more problems than they're worth. So if you have them, they're legal right now, but you cannot install new ones, and you can't replace old ones. So when they're done, they're done. You have to go to another method of overflow prevention.
How many problems have you had with the OPV on the left?
The flapper valve?
Yeah.
They function. They do pretty well. Usually they're used at a retail facility, but you have people that do tricky things like drop in tank sticks to override them. I got fined $30,000 in New Jersey for doing that.
Because I've had customers here in Westchester, the county made them put that in, and then they jam up.
Yeah, but what type of delivery? Gravity or pressurized? They don't work for pressurized deliveries. That's
for two oil delivery, yes.
Yeah, that could be the problem. You need to know.
Yeah, well, somebody needs to tell that somebody with the scientific expertise needs to tell the county to stop making
pressurized delivery. Just blow right past that thing. That's right. It's a pain in the neck, but they work fine for gravity. All right. So methods of leak detection, again, tightness tests. secondary containment with interstitial monitoring. I'm going to show you a picture of that here in a little bit. Automatic tank gauging, vapor and groundwater monitoring. Those are pretty much out the window, because if you're monitoring vapors in the soil or monitoring groundwater to see if there's hydrocarbons or gasoline or fuel oil in the groundwater, it's too late at that point. It's already out of the tank. All right, so we want to be proactive instead of reactive. So those are kind of out the window. Statistical inventory monitoring, that's actually now acceptable in New York State, and manual tank gauging. Here's what we were talking about earlier with the interstitial electronic leak detection. This is your double wall tank. This is just a cutaway of it. You have your inner wall here, and you have your outer wall down here. Your fuel is on the inside. What the interstitial electronic leak detection allows you to do is, it's actually a little mechanical switch that sits right down at the bottom of the tank. And our guys, there's a string that goes through that. They tie the sensor to it and they pull it all the way through. When it gets to the bottom, there's a little red dot in the string, so they know it's exactly at 6 o'clock on the tank. And that's connected through wires to your automatic tank gauge. So if there any liquid or fuel, whether it's water or fuel, any liquid gets in there, it sets off the sensor, and your automatic tank gauge goes into alarm, and it notifies the person that the tank is effectively, there's a problem with it. So somebody needs to come out and take a look at it, try to find out what the problem is. So that's what interstitial electronic leak detection is. One other thing I recommend that people do is you need to have some type of a facility response plan. Okay, particularly if you got a large apartment building or something, the people that manage it, whether it's an organization, you got 90 properties, you got 500 properties, whatever your case is, you need to have some type of plan to address, the oh shit situations. What do we do now? A lot of folks with, if you have greater than 1,340 gallons of above ground storage tank, of storage in an above ground situation, the federal government requires that you have what's called an SPCC plan. It's a spill prevention, control and countermeasures plan. And that's a requirement for certain facilities. If you have greater than 40 or 42,000 gallons of underground storage, you need an SPCC plan as well. So that's something you should look into. Excuse me. So what happens if you have a leak? I just wanted to throw this quick schematic up, and then we can take questions, and we'll be all set at that point. If you have an underground storage tank and it leaks, depending on where the water table is, where the aquifer is, gasoline is called an LNAPL, or LNAPL. It's a light non-aqueous phase liquid. What does that mean? It's got a density less than 1. It floats on water. Okay, so if you have a spill of gasoline or fuel oil, it's going to float on the water surface. So if you have a tank, right here, and you've got your soil, that gasoline is going, or fuel oil is going to travel straight down until it gets to a point where it hits the water table. And then you're going to have this NAPL, or non-aqueous phase liquid, and it's going to, a certain portion of it's going to dissolve in the groundwater, and a certain portion is going to be hung up in the soil. You can see up here between the soil particles. That's where the product is. And that's what we do after, there's a spill. We as scientists, we go out and we do these soil and groundwater investigations, poke holes in the ground. We actually collect soil samples. We collect groundwater samples, send them off to a laboratory and have them analyzed. And we can also do things like dissolved hydrocarbon distribution maps, so we can kind of give you an idea where the plume is, the aerial extent of it. We can also do groundwater contour maps, so it'll tell you, which way the groundwater is flowing. So you can look at what are the potential sensitive receptors. Am I going to impact the daycare center across the street with a well, or is it going in the other direction? Those are some of the things that we do. But you don't want to get into a situation like this. One of the other things I'll say about this too, gasoline, fuel oil, gasoline more so than fuel oil, they're volatile liquids. What does volatile mean? It likes to evaporate, right? So if you have a spill, whether it's gasoline or fuel oil, that material is, if exposed to the atmosphere, is going to, a certain portion of it is going to evaporate. And what happens underground? Guess what? The same thing happens. It evaporates and it works its way up through the pore space of little soil particles, and it can enter buildings. and you can have vapors. And I've done this way too many times where you have to put in blowers and fans and, you know, put a vacuum on someone's house to prevent, or positive pressure on it to prevent those vapors from coming into the building. And that's a real serious health threat that the DEC and the regulatory agencies, New York State Department of Health, are focusing on these days. So, don't have a spill. Pay attention to your tanks. If you don't know what's going on, call somebody in to help you out. It's really kind of the moral of the story. Unless you guys want to add anything, we're pretty much right on time. Any questions on anything at all? Great.
Well, just
Yes.
one, just what actually is more of a statement. I know you've been addressing buried tanks,
Yep.
but with one of the revisions is the definition of the UST, that being any tank that is in a basement, it's really above ground, but it's covered with a material or buried 10%,
Right.
is now considered a UST,
Correct.
which falls under a lot of the codes of pretty much what you've been addressing.
613, yeah,
A lot
613.
of people don't know that.
Right.
So that's, I just wanted to put that out because I know David knows me, and I'm not sure who the audience is, but that's something that's really important. When I work for Original Energy, Robeson,
Sure.
and I started a program where I actually do inspections and write reports.
Yep.
I've dug into the code real deep, and it's pretty, you know, you're all over the place.
It
But
is.
I've done close to 80 reports now, and I've addressed a lot of the similar issues.
Yep.
Some, of course, are different, but people need to know about the placards, and they need to know about
Fill port labeling.
all the other
yeah,
stuff.
Yeah.
But,
Again, on regulated tanks, if it's above.
Oh,
so, yeah.
say 80, but I'm
exactly.
talking, you know,
Yeah.
up to, I've seen a couple tanks, most of them are in the 3, 5,
Yeah.
you know,
They're a
6.
regulated tank, yep.
Yeah.
Fuel oil, you have to have a green hexagon, you know, it's for color coding. If it's diesel, it's a yellow hexagon, you know, gasoline and all the various distillates have their own color code.
Just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, but labeling, PBS ID number, design capacity,
Registration,
working
weep
capacity.
holes, leak
all that stuff.
detection,
Yeah, yeah. It's a pain in the
it's a
neck.
gamut of, and it's funny what you said, category 1, 2, 3, AST, UST, it's okay, where do I fit?
Right.
You know.
Yeah, it's important to know. And again, it's a lot of it is dependent on how old the tank is when it was installed. You guys got anything? Folks, thanks, appreciate your
Thank
time.
you.
Have a great day.